In a quiet American town, the 4th of July is a celebration of community and freedom. But this year, the holiday becomes the backdrop for a nightmare when the seemingly perfect Mitchell family vanishes without a trace from their locked home. No sign of forced entry, no struggle, just an eerie silence where laughter and life should be. As investigators dig, they uncover unsettling secrets lurking beneath the town's friendly surface and a digital trail that leads not to safety, but to a terrifying unknown. What happened to the Mitchells? Find out the chilling truth as the mystery unfolds. Watch the full story to the end. Share your theories in the comments below, and subscribe for more true crime narratives. The 4th of July dawned under a sky painted the pale, hopeful blue of a well-worn flag. In Havenwood, a town nestled so deep in the American Midwest it felt like the geographical equivalent of a gentle sigh. This meant one thing. The air was already thick with the promise of barbecue smoke, cut grass, and the distant, cheerful pop of firecrackers. By 8 a.m. on July 4, 2024, the mercury was already climbing, and the humidity clung to everything like a damp secret. Arthur Henderson, a man whose life ran on the precision of a well-maintained grandfather clock, was on his porch by 8:03 a.m., exactly 3 minutes after finishing his second cup of coffee. His routine was sacred. Check the mail, water the petunias lining his walkway, and cast a casual, neighborly glance down Sycamore Lane. He'd lived in the same house for 42 years, seen families come and go, seen children grow into adults with children of their own. He knew the rhythm of the street like the beat of his own heart. And the rhythm of the Mitchell house directly across from his was usually loud and bright on a day like this. John Mitchell would be out front by now, wrestling with the grill, likely already wearing a slightly too patriotic t-shirt. Emily, bless her energetic soul, would be buzzing around, perhaps hanging a festive wreath or corralling their 2 teenagers, Sarah and Tommy. The kids themselves would probably be sprawled on the porch steps, glued to their phones, or maybe already off with friends, their bikes abandoned on the lawn. Life, loud and messy and undeniably present, usually spilled out of the Mitchells' 2-story colonial. But this morning, silence held sway. Arthur's eyes, sharp despite his 71 years, fixed on the house. The porch was empty. No grill smoke drifted towards the street. The bikes were gone, which wasn't unusual, but the house itself felt still, uninhabited almost. He took a step off his porch, the worn wood creaking a familiar tune beneath his slippers. He squinted. The curtains in the living room window, usually open to let the morning sun flood in, were drawn tight. The upstairs windows, too, every single one. That was odd. Emily was meticulous about letting in the light, said it chased away the dust bunnies and the bad moods. Arthur walked slowly to his mailbox, the metal flag already down. The mailman, bless his early bird soul, had already been by. He shuffled through the usual flyers and bills, his gaze constantly drifting back to the quiet house across the street. He knew it was silly. Maybe they'd gone out for an early breakfast. Maybe they were sleeping in after a late night. It was a holiday after all. People broke routine. But the total absence of any sign of life, the unnerving stillness, prickled the back of his neck. Even their golden retriever, Buddy, wasn't out in the yard, chasing squirrels or barking hello to the occasional jogger. Buddy was practically part of the Sycamore Lane landscape on a summer morning. Arthur finished watering his petunias, the cool spray a temporary distraction from the growing unease. He stood for a moment longer, watering can in hand, just watching. The sun climbed higher, warming the pavement, but a faint chill had settled over Arthur. It wasn't just the drawn curtains or the quiet. It was a feeling, a disruption in the familiar rhythm of Havenwood, a single off-key note in the cheerful symphony of the 4th of July. He walked back inside, the screen door slapping shut behind him. He glanced at the phone on the kitchen counter. Should he call? Just a quick, friendly, "Happy 4th, everything okay?" No, that would be nosy, un-neighborly in a way. Still, as he put the watering can away, the image of the dark, silent house stayed with him. It wasn't right, Not for the Mitchells. Not on the 4th of July. It was just a little thing, easily dismissed, but in Arthur Henderson's long and orderly life, little things that were out of place had a way of growing, like weeds in a perfect garden until they choked out everything else. And a completely silent house across the street felt very, very out of place. The heart of Havenwood on July 4th beat around the town square. Strings of red, white, and blue bunting crisscrossed between lampposts. Vendors hawked sticky sweet cotton candy and sizzling hot dogs, and the air vibrated with a mix of classic rock from a makeshift stage and the excited shrieks of children chasing each other with sparklers, prematurely, to the chagrin of their parents. This was the annual town picnic, the undisputed highlight of the summer calendar, where the entire community seemed to converge under the benevolent July sun. Emily Mitchell never missed the picnic. As a third-grade teacher at Havenwood Elementary, she was practically the unofficial activities coordinator, always volunteering for the face-painting booth or organizing the three-legged race. John, while less overtly enthusiastic, could always be found near the grills, trading jokes and comparing barbecue techniques with the other dads. Sarah and Tommy, at 16 and 14 respectively, might feign indifference, but they were always there too, disappearing into the milling crowds of their friends, eventually surfacing for a burger or a slice of watermelon. So, when noon rolled around and the picnic grounds were teeming with familiar faces, their absence began to register. "Seen Emily yet?" Martha Gable asked Carol Peterson, shielding her eyes against the glare as she scanned the crowd near the food tables. "Said she'd bring her famous potato salad." Carol frowned, shaking her head. "No, haven't. Tried calling her earlier about the sign-up sheet for the bake sale, but her phone went straight to voicemail. John's, too. Voicemail in Havenwood, where cell service was less a utility and more a fickle friend. A single unanswered call wasn't unusual. But multiple calls? To both of them? That was odd. Across the square, young Billy Carter, Tommy Mitchell's best friend, sat slumped on a picnic bench scrolling through his phone with a frustrated air. He'd sent Tommy 3 texts since morning, about meeting up, about the lame town band, about everything and nothing that teenagers talked about. All delivered, none read. He'd tried calling too, just before leaving for the picnic. No answer. It wasn't like Tommy to just disappear, especially on the 4th. By 2 p.m., as the sack races were in full swing and the pie-eating contest was about to begin, the low murmur of concern about the Mitchells started to weave its way through the festive atmosphere. Conversations paused. Eyes scanned the entrances, half expecting to see John's broad grin or Emily's wave. Maybe they had a last-minute trip, someone suggested, but it sounded weak, even to the speaker. The Mitchells planned everything. A spontaneous 4th of July getaway felt completely out of character. "Sarah didn't show up for practice yesterday," reported Coach Miller, his brow furrowed. Sarah was a dedicated soccer player, rarely missed a practice. The cheerful sounds of the picnic began to feel slightly off-key, like a melody played with a missing note. The initial, mild curiosity from the morning, first sparked by Arthur Henderson's observations, was slowly morphing into something more substantial. A shared, unspoken worry that hung in the humid air like the scent of distant rain. As the afternoon wore on, more people tried calling, texting. Colleagues from the school and John's hardware store, parents of Sarah and Tommy's friends, even distant relatives living a town over who were expecting them for a later dinner. All met with the same digital silence. Straight to voicemail. No replies to texts. Their social media remained dormant since yesterday. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the now slightly littered picnic grounds. The initial rush of holiday excitement had peaked and was beginning its wane, giving way to a quiet, lingering unease. The Mitchells weren't just late or even absent, they were unreachable. And in a town like Havenwood, where everyone was connected by invisible threads of shared history and daily interaction, being unreachable wasn't just unusual. It felt impossible. The strange silence from the house on Sycamore Lane had spread, echoing now in the unanswered calls and the quiet questions exchanged between worried neighbors under the fading holiday sky. The bright promise of the morning had given way to a growing shadow of the unknown. The fireworks over Havenwood peaked around 9 o'clock, a spectacular, booming display of light and color that painted the inky sky. Down on Sycamore Lane, Arthur Henderson watched from his porch swing, the percussive bursts echoing the unsettled rhythm in his chest. The Mitchell house remained dark, silent, and resolutely curtained. Buddy, the usually rambunctious golden retriever, hadn't barked once all day. Arthur hadn't seen him, hadn't heard him. A dog going silent? That was even stranger than the closed curtains. His phone had buzzed sporadically throughout the evening with texts from other neighbors. Still haven't seen the Mitchells? Anyone hear from Emily? The collective unease, initially a faint whisper, had amplified into a chorus of quiet concern. By the time the last firework faded, leaving trails of smoke in the air and ringing in Arthur's ears, he knew he couldn't wait any more. Neighborly discretion had its limits. His fingers fumbled slightly as he dialed the non-emergency number for the Havenwood Police Department. "My name is Arthur Henderson," he said, his voice a little rough. "I'm calling about my neighbors, the Mitchell family. John and Emily and their kids, Sarah and Tommy. Something's not right. Nobody's seen or heard from them all day, and their house? It just looks empty." Less than 20 minutes later, a single patrol car pulled up in front of the Mitchell house. A moment later, another car, unmarked, parked behind it. From the second car emerged a man Arthur hadn't seen before. He wasn't in uniform, wore a simple dark jacket despite the lingering warmth, and carried himself with a quiet, observant air that set him apart from the younger uniformed officer. The uniformed officer approached Arthur, who had walked down to the sidewalk. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Officer Miller. This is Detective Reynolds." Detective Reynolds was younger than Arthur had expected, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His handshake was firm. "Mr. Henderson, you called about the Mitchells?" "Yes, Detective," Arthur said, gesturing across the street. "Like I told the dispatcher, it's the 4th. They should be home or at the town picnic or somewhere loud and happy. But the house is dark. Curtains all drawn. Haven't seen a sign of them, or their dog all day. Nobody else has either." Tried calling, but no answer. Reynolds nodded, his gaze steady on the Mitchell house. "How long have you known the family, Mr. Henderson? Any problems you were aware of? Financial? Marital? Anything unusual lately?" "Known 'em 15 years," Arthur replied. "Good folks. John runs the hardware store. Emily teaches 3rd grade. Kids are good kids. Normal, didn't seem like any problems. That's why this is so unsettling." After getting the basic information and confirming that no one had a key, Detective Reynolds instructed the uniformed officer to secure the perimeter while he and another officer prepared to enter the house. There was a brief, tense moment as the officer worked on the back door, a quiet click echoing in the night air that felt louder than any firework. They stepped inside. Arthur watched from his porch as lights flickered on inside the Mitchell's house, room by room, revealing glimpses of a perfectly ordinary home frozen in time. Detective Reynolds did a slow walk-through, his eyes scanning every detail. The air inside was still and warm, carrying the faint scent of something sweet, maybe leftover dessert. In the kitchen, a few dirty dishes sat in the sink next to the faint outline of a finished meal on the counter. The coffee maker was off, but a mug sat beside it. In the living room, cushions were slightly askew on the sofa. A remote control lay on the coffee table, and a magazine was open face down on an armchair. Upstairs, the beds were unmade, clothes draped over chairs, typical teenage clutter. In the master bedroom, the bedclothes were pulled back as if the occupants had simply gotten out of bed. Toothbrushes were in their holder in the bathroom. Nothing looked out of place in a way that suggested a struggle. No overturned furniture. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. The back door had been unlocked but not forced open. It was as if the family had simply walked out, leaving behind everything: wallets, keys, phones, even Buddy's empty food bowl by the back door. Buddy was found whimpering quietly in the laundry room, unharmed but clearly neglected. Detective Reynolds stood in the middle of the living room, the mundane reality of the untouched house feeling more jarring than any scene of disarray could have. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay on a card table, depicting a cheerful scene of a lighthouse. It was a snapshot of normal life, abandoned mid-completion. He ran a hand over the back of a sofa cushion. The silence in the house was profound, broken only by the distant echoes of the lingering holiday and the crackle of his police radio. A family of 4, seemingly vanished into thin air from their secure home on the busiest, loudest night of the year. No forced entry, no struggle. Just gone. The unsettling mystery of the Mitchells had just officially begun. July 5, 2024, the festive flags on Sycamore Lane suddenly looked less like symbols of celebration and more like mute, bewildered witnesses. Yellow police tape, stark against the green lawn, now cordoned off the Mitchell house, a jarring splash of caution tape that hummed with unspoken questions. The cheerful detritus of yesterday's holiday. A stray bottle rocket casing, a forgotten picnic blanket in a nearby yard, felt obscene, a cruel reminder of the normalcy that had shattered overnight. Detective Reynolds stood on the Mitchells' porch, the wood cool and hard under his feet. The uniformed officers moved with quiet efficiency, canvassing the immediate neighbors, setting up a small command post in a parked cruiser. The initial walkthrough last night had confirmed it. No sign of forced entry, no obvious struggle, nothing violently overturned or broken. The house was neat, almost unnervingly so in some areas, lived in and abandoned in others. It was the ghost of a normal life, abruptly vacated. He flipped through his small notebook, reviewing the preliminary reports. John Mitchell, 48, owner of Havenwood Hardware. Emily Mitchell, 46, beloved third-grade teacher. Sarah Mitchell, 16, high school sophomore, soccer team. Tommy Mitchell, 14, freshman, band member. A perfectly average American family in a perfectly average American town. Except they were gone. The first few interviews painted a consistent picture. The Mitchells were stable, well-liked, involved in the community. No whispers of major marital strife, no known enemies, no sudden financial ruin, nothing that screamed reason to vanish. People were shocked, bewildered. Just saw Emily at the grocery store on Tuesday, Mrs. Gable told the interviewing officer, wringing her hands. Talking about her class field trip, normal as could be. Reynolds himself spoke again with Arthur Henderson, sitting in Arthur's neat living room that smelled faintly of lemon polish. Anything else you can think of, Mr. Henderson? Anything at all? Visitors? Deliveries? Anything out of the ordinary in the days leading up to the 4th? Arthur shook his head, his eyes troubled. No, detective, just the usual, mail, newspaper. They had some landscaping done last week. Truck was here a couple days. But that's it. Just life, until it wasn't. He paused, looking out the window at the taped-off house. It's like they just evaporated. The term evaporated echoed the bewildering lack of evidence inside. Possessions of value, jewelry, electronics, cash left in a jar on the counter, were untouched. Their cars were in the driveway. Their phones, according to initial pings, were still in the house. This wasn't a family packing up to leave. This was a family going to bed or sitting down to relax and then simply ceasing to be there. The initial theories felt like grasping at smoke, a spontaneous trip that somehow involved leaving everything behind and telling no one? Highly improbable for this family. Family problems escalating into a sudden, drastic departure. Possible. But where was the evidence in the house, and why take the kids without any preparation? Foul play seemed the most likely, but where was the struggle? Where was the sign of forced entry? Had they known their abductor? Had they gone willingly with someone only for it to go wrong? Maybe they went camping, offered a younger officer, looking hopeful. Reynolds shook his head. No camping gear is missing. Their hiking boots are by the back door. No backpacks packed. And you don't go camping on the 4th of July without telling anyone, leaving your phones, and taking your dog. The sheer normality of the scene in the house was the most disturbing clue of all. It defied easy explanation. It hinted at something unseen, something that didn't leave broken lamps or forced windows in its wake. As the day wore on, the interviews continued, the circle widening to friends, extended family, all as clueless as the neighbors, and colleagues. The same refrain played out. Shock, disbelief, no idea why the Mitchells would just disappear. The puzzle pieces were all mundane. Busy schedules, school events, summer plans. But they didn't fit together to form a picture of why an entire family would vanish without a trace from the quiet safety of their home. Detective Reynolds felt the familiar, heavy weight of a case with no easy answers settling in. The Mitchell family hadn't just disappeared. They had stepped off the face of the earth, leaving behind a house that looked perfectly normal, and a town that knew, with chilling certainty, that nothing was normal anymore. Havenwood wore its Sunday best on July 5th, a facade of quiet concern that barely masked the nervous energy humming beneath. The yellow tape around the Mitchell house was a physical barrier, but the disappearance itself had erected an invisible one, separating the town's comforting familiarity from a chilling, unknown reality. Detective Reynolds spent the day navigating this altered landscape. His presence a polite, persistent intrusion into the town's routines. He started at the Donut Stop, a local institution where morning gossip was exchanged as freely as coffee refills. The air was thick with the sweet smell of glazed pastries and the low, worried murmur of a conversation about the Mitchells. Reynolds, nursing a lukewarm black coffee, listened more than he spoke, observing the quick glances exchanged, the sudden silences when he approached a table. He learned that John Mitchell's hardware store had been facing tough competition from the new chain store out on the highway. "Hard times for small business," a man in overalls grumbled into his coffee cup, not meeting Reynolds' eye. John put a brave face on it, but you could tell he was feeling the pinch. Later, at the town hall, while reviewing property records and business licenses, Reynolds chatted with the longtime town clerk, a woman named Agnes with a memory like a steel trap and a keen understanding of Havenwood's intricate social web. Agnes spoke highly of Emily Mitchell, calling her a dedicated teacher. But when asked if Emily seemed stressed or different lately, Agnes paused, tapping a pen against her ledger. "Emily's always been strong," she said slowly. "But, well, teaching isn't easy these days. And teenagers have their troubles. Sarah, she was a quiet one. Tommy, bit of a dreamer." Agnes didn't elaborate, but the slight hesitation, the way her gaze drifted towards the window, suggested there might be more. She wasn't saying, or perhaps couldn't quite articulate. Reynolds drove by Havenwood Hardware. The open sign was dark, a handwritten, closed due to family emergency note taped to the glass door. Peering through the window, he saw orderly aisles of tools and supplies, a picture of small-town commerce frozen in place. Had the pressure of keeping it afloat become too much for John? Had it led to a desperate decision? He spoke with some of Sarah and Tommy's friends, navigating the awkward silences and shrugged shoulders of teenagers uncomfortable talking to a cop. They spoke of typical high school drama. Crushes, school projects, part-time jobs, nothing that screamed reason to disappear. Yet he noticed a certain guardedness, a reluctance to delve too deep into conversations about the Mitchell kids' home lives. Were they protecting their friends, or did they sense something was off, even before July 4th? The more he dug, the more Reynolds realized that Havenwood, like any small town, had its layers. Beneath the surface of friendly waves and community events were the usual human complexities, financial worries, unspoken tensions, the quiet struggles that families faced behind closed doors. Were these struggles enough to make a family vanish? Unlikely on their own, but perhaps combined with something else? He spent the late afternoon walking through the park near the elementary school where Emily taught, watching kids play, the cheerful sounds a stark contrast to the grim purpose of his visit. He thought about the interviews, the fragmented pieces of information, the struggling business, the hint of quiet stress, the teenagers' reticence. Individually, they were just threads of ordinary life, but woven together with the baffling scene in the Mitchell house, the untouched valuables, the cars in the driveway, the dog left behind, they formed a pattern that was anything but ordinary. As dusk began to settle over Havenwood, casting long shadows that seemed to deepen the town's secrets, Detective Reynolds understood that finding the Mitchells wouldn't just be about following leads, it would be about peeling back the layers of a community, understanding the hidden pressures and the unspoken truths that might hold the key to a family that had simply, impossibly, disappeared. The cold, fluorescent lights of the police station interview room did little to ease the palpable nervousness of the teenagers sitting across from Detective Reynolds. This wasn't their world. Theirs was a world of Snapchat streaks, TikTok dances, whispered secrets in school hallways, and the intense, immediate drama of adolescence. Sitting here, facing a quiet, observant man asking questions about their missing friends, felt alien and deeply unsettling. Reynolds interviewed Sarah's friends first. Jessica sat rigidly on the edge of her seat, twisting a ring on her finger. Maria was quieter, eyes downcast. They spoke of Sarah as smart, a little reserved, fiercely loyal to her close friends. Soccer was her passion. They talked about school, about college applications looming, about the usual crushes and minor friend group dramas. Did Sarah seem different lately? Reynolds asked, his voice low and even. More stressed? Worried about anything? Jessica hesitated, glancing at Maria. I mean, yeah, senior year is stressful, Jessica offered, her voice tight. College stuff and just, like, home stuff sometimes? Home stuff? Reynolds prompted gently. Just normal parent stuff, Maria interjected quickly, her voice barely audible. Like rules, curfews, nothing. She trailed off, shrugging. He asked about her plans for the 4th. Standard stuff. Picnic, then maybe hanging out, watching fireworks. Nothing unusual. Had she mentioned any trips? Any plans her parents didn't know about? Weekend getaways with friends? Jessica chewed her lip. She talked about wanting to get away, maybe after graduation, like a road trip. But that was just dreaming, you know. Not a real plan. Tommy's friends were next. More fidgeting, more nervous energy. Mark was boisterous, trying to crack jokes that fell flat in the sterile room. Kevin was quieter, looking genuinely scared. They described Tommy as funny, into video games, a decent drummer in the school band. Was Tommy into anything risky? Reynolds asked. Sneaking out? Parties? Anything his parents wouldn't approve of? Mark grinned nervously. Dude, everyone sneaks out sometimes, right? But Tommy wasn't like a wild man maybe snuck out to play games at Kevin's once in a while. Nothing big. Did he have any secrets? Reynolds asked, his gaze settling on Kevin. Kevin swallowed hard. I don't know about secrets, Kevin stammered. He was just Tommy. We talked about, like, girls and stuff and games. Was he talking about meeting anyone? Reynolds pressed. Online. Anyone new? The boys exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. Nah, man, Mark said a little too loudly. Tommy wasn't like that. But the hesitation, the shared look, didn't escape Reynolds. Teenagers were often fiercely protective of each other, especially when it came to things their parents didn't know about. He asked about the night of July 3rd and the morning of the 4th. Tommy was supposed to maybe hang out with them on the 4th, after the picnic. They hadn't made firm plans for the evening of the 3rd. Had Tommy mentioned anything unusual about his family? Any arguments? Any tension at home? They seemed fine, Mark offered, though his tone held a question mark. Like normal parents. Bit strict sometimes, maybe, but nothing crazy. As the interviews wrapped up, Reynolds was left with a familiar jumble of adolescent information. Sneaking out for video games, daydreams of road trips, typical teenage evasiveness. Were there deeper secrets the friends weren't sharing? A secret online relationship? A planned rendezvous that went wrong? Or were these just the ordinary small deceptions of growing up, tragically irrelevant to the current crisis? He thanked the teenagers watching them practically bolt from the room, eager to escape the heavy atmosphere. Their relief at leaving was palpable, a stark contrast to the lingering questions they left behind. Teenagers built walls between their lives and their parents, small fortresses of independence. Had Sarah or Tommy had a secret life, a plan, a contact that their parents and now the police knew nothing about? He looked at the notes he'd scribbled, fleeting mentions of home stuff, nervous glances, quick denials. Ordinary teenage lives, perhaps, but in the context of their impossible disappearance, every detail, no matter how small or seemingly typical, now felt weighted with the chilling possibility of something more. The gap between what was known about the Mitchell teenagers and what might have been hidden felt vast and dark. In the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the regional forensics lab, the Mitchell family's digital lives were being meticulously disassembled. John's and Emily's smartphones, a shared family desktop computer, Sarah's laptop and phone, and Tommy's gaming PC and phone, the devices that were extensions of their personalities, repositories of countless memories and mundane interactions, were now evidence, cold and inert under the lab lights. Detective Reynolds wasn't in the lab himself, but he was on the phone constantly with the tech team, waiting for any flicker of light in the digital darkness. They started with the phones, the most immediate links to the outside world. Call logs, text messages, app data. John's phone showed a typical pattern. Calls to suppliers for the hardware store, texts with Emily, a few calls with friends. The last outgoing call was to a customer on the afternoon of July 3rd. The last incoming was a spam call ignored later that evening. No frantic calls, no unusual numbers, nothing deleted in the call history. His text messages were equally mundane. Grocery lists, confirmations of appointments, a cheerful exchange with Emily about dinner plans for the 3rd. Emily's phone mirrored John's in its normalcy. Texts with colleagues about school events, messages with a book club, calls with her parents. Her last activity was checking the weather forecast for July 4th late on the evening of the 3rd. Normal. The teenagers' phones were a different story, as expected. A torrent of social media notifications, group chats filled with inside jokes and memes, endless scrolling history. Sarah's phone revealed a typical teenage social life, constant communication with her close friends, school-related group chats, photos from recent events. Her search history showed college websites, fashion trends, and queries about summer jobs. Nothing immediately suspicious. However, a block of messages with one friend, Jessica, seemed to have been deleted from Sarah's side of the conversation. Jessica's phone, when later examined with her parents' permission, still had the full exchange. But the fact that Sarah had deleted them raised a small flag. What had they been talking about that Sarah felt the need to erase it? Tommy's phone was a deep dive into the world of online gaming and teenage humor. Discord chats, YouTube history, filled with gaming videos, texts with his core group of friends about strategies and shared online experiences. His search history included game cheats, reviews of new tech, and, less surprisingly given his friends' comments, a few searches about sneaking out. But there were also searches about bus schedules to a town about an hour away, conducted in the week before they disappeared. Why would Tommy be looking up bus routes out of Havenwood? He didn't take the bus anywhere. The family computer and Tommy's gaming PC offered deeper dives. The desktop, used by everyone, showed recent activity related to John's business finances. Spreadsheets open, online banking accessed. There were also tabs open for news sites and weather. Emily had recently used it for schoolwork. The search history on the desktop seemed standard. Tommy's gaming PC was where things got more interesting. Beyond the expected gaming-related data, forensic analysis revealed he had been using a private browse window frequently in the days leading up to July 4th. Recovering the history from these sessions was challenging, but the lab was working on it. What was he looking at that he didn't want saved? And was it related to the bus schedules he'd been searching for on his phone? The digital footprints left by the Mitchells were a mix of the utterly mundane and the subtly perplexing. No dramatic suicide notes, no desperate calls for help. No communication with known criminals. Just the quiet hum of ordinary lives with a few strange anomalies that didn't fit the picture of a sudden, peaceful departure. Deleted messages, bus schedules to nowhere, hidden browse history. Small threads of digital possibility that were now the most promising leads in a case defined by the absence of physical clues. As Detective Reynolds hung up the phone, the sterile data felt both illuminating and deeply frustrating. The Mitchells had left their digital selves behind, and those selves hinted at secrets their real-world home had kept hidden. The online world, often seen as separate, was bleeding into the mystery, suggesting that perhaps the key to finding them lay not just in the physical town but in the hidden corners of their digital lives. Days bled into a week, then stretched towards the next. The yellow tape around the Mitchell house, once a temporary-looking barrier, now felt permanent, a festering wound on the manicured facade of Sycamore Lane. The initial shock and outpouring of neighborly concern in Havenwood had curdled into something sharper, heavier. Anxiety, unaddressed, had morphed into suspicion, clinging to the humid July air like a second skin. The town, usually a place where grocery store aisles were social hubs and the post office was a daily check-in point, now felt brittle. Eyes that used to meet with easy recognition now darted away or lingered too long, filled with unspoken questions and nascent doubt. Conversations, once fluid and familiar, stuttered and died when a newcomer approached, especially if that newcomer was Detective Reynolds or one of his officers. Rumors, the insidious byproduct of fear and a vacuum of information, slithered through Havenwood like snakes in tall grass. They started as whispers. Had John's business really been okay? I heard they were leveraged to the hilt. Emily seemed so tired lately. Maybe she was going through something we didn't know. They escalated into darker murmurings. Maybe they just wanted out, staged the whole thing. Or maybe someone from around here, someone with a grudge. Every odd interaction, every past disagreement, every personal quirk of the Mitchells or their neighbors was being re-examined through the grim lens of their disappearance. Detective Reynolds felt the shift acutely. Interviews that had begun with open shock and a willingness to help were now met with closed-off expressions, tight lips, and carefully worded answers. People who had known the Mitchells for years suddenly claimed not to know them that well. Questions about finances, about personal habits, about any unusual visitors or arguments were deflected with nervous coughs and hurried excuses. He sat in the back booth of the donut stop, observing. The easy banter from a week ago was gone, replaced by hushed tones and quick, furtive glances towards the windows. He saw neighbors who used to chat freely now give each other wide berth. The shared tragedy hadn't united Havenwood. It was slowly, subtly, tearing it apart. Everyone was a potential witness, a potential suspect, or someone who might be hiding something, either about the Mitchells or about themselves. He tried talking to a man who owned the garage down the street, asking if the Mitchells had any car trouble or if John ever mentioned anyone he had issues with. The man, normally gregarious, suddenly became intensely focused on wiping down his counter, offering only curt "nopes" and "can't recall." It wasn't just reluctance. It felt like active resistance, a drawing inward, a closing of ranks. The psychological toll on the town was becoming as significant as the mystery itself. Parents watched their children more closely, the ease of allowing them to roam freely evaporating. The friendly wave from a passing car now came with a flicker of, "Who is that?" Fear was the new undercurrent of daily life. Reynolds understood it on a detached, professional level. Small towns thrived on trust and a shared narrative. The Mitchells' disappearance had shattered both. It introduced the terrifying possibility that danger didn't just come from outside, it could be hidden within, a secret malignancy in the heart of their familiar world. And in the scramble to make sense of the impossible, people began to look at each other differently, seeing shadows where there were once only neighbors. As the sun set on another day without the Mitchells, casting long, suspicious shadows across the now quiet streets, Detective Reynolds leaned back in the booth, the cold coffee untouched. The physical evidence in the Mitchell house was bafflingly absent, but the psychological landscape of Havenwood was becoming a minefield of fear and suspicion, a tangled web of human reactions that was proving just as difficult to navigate as the mystery itself. Finding the truth meant not only uncovering what happened to the Mitchells, but also understanding what the disappearance was revealing about the town they left behind. And Havenwood, he was quickly learning, had more layers than its picture-perfect surface suggested. By mid-July 2024, the initial surge of volunteer energy in Havenwood had settled into a grim, methodical routine. The organized searches, coordinated by Detective Reynolds and the County Sheriff's Department, expanded outwards from the Mitchell house. Teams combed the nearby woods and fields. Officers checked abandoned buildings and talked to anyone who might have seen anything unusual on the night of July 3rd or the early hours of the 4th. The hope of finding the family safe had begun to feel like a distant, fading star, replaced by the grim determination to find something, anything, that would explain their vanishing act. It was a stifling Tuesday afternoon, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer when the call came in. Not from a seasoned officer following a solid lead, but from a volunteer, a local high school teacher named Brenda Miller, who had taken personal leave to help with the search efforts. Her assigned area that day was a less trafficked stretch of road leading out of town, bordered by dense woods on one side and a neglected, overgrown field on the other. The kind of place you wouldn't pay much attention to unless you were specifically looking. Brenda, sweat trickling down her temples, was moving slowly along the edge of the field, pushing aside tall weeds and tangled vines, scanning the ground. Most of what she found was discarded trash, empty cans, plastic bottles, the usual neglect of forgotten places. Then her foot snagged on something soft hidden in the undergrowth. She bent down, pushing aside a curtain of weeds, and her breath hitched. Lying, half buried in the dirt, tangled with dried grass, was a child's sneaker. Small, bright blue, with distinctive neon green laces, the kind that lit up when you walked. Brenda stared at it, her mind momentarily blank. Then a jolt went through her. She'd seen those sneakers before. Tommy Mitchell's sneakers. He'd been so proud of them, showing them off at the last school bake sale. Her hands trembled as she carefully dug around it. It wasn't just dropped. It looked like it had been torn off. One of the neon green laces was frayed and broken, the fabric near the eyelets stretched and slightly ripped. There was a smudge of dark grime near the sole and a faint scuff mark across the toe. It was just one shoe, just a child's sneaker, but lying there, in the silent, overgrown field, miles from Tommy's home, it screamed louder than any firework. Brenda carefully marked the location with the small orange flag she carried and radioed it in, her voice shaking. I think I found something. Off County Road 17, a sneaker, I think it might be Tommy Mitchell's. Detective Reynolds was on the scene within 20 minutes, the police tape going up around the immediate area where the sneaker was found. Forensic technicians in their white suits meticulously photographed and bagged the shoe. Reynolds knelt beside the small muddy piece of evidence, his gaze sweeping the surrounding area. The location was key. It was several miles from the Mitchell house, in the opposite direction from the town square and the park. It wasn't on any route the family would typically take for a walk or a short drive. And the condition of the shoe, torn lace, scuff marks, the way it seemed to have been pulled off rather than simply slipping off, told a story that contradicted the peaceful, empty house. This wasn't an item casually lost on a family outing. This was something left behind in haste, possibly during a struggle or while running. The finding blew a hole in the prevailing theories of a voluntary disappearance. No family planning to leave would drive several miles out of town, pull over here and somehow lose a child's shoe in this condition. It strongly suggested that the Mitchells had left their home unwillingly or had encountered trouble shortly after leaving. Looking at the small forlorn sneaker so out of place in the quiet field, Detective Reynolds felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Mitchell house had been a mystery of absence, a void where a family should be. This single muddy sneaker was a terrifying piece of presence, a concrete indicator that the family's disappearance was not just strange but potentially sinister. The investigation had just taken a dark and urgent turn. The question was no longer where did they go, but what happened to them out here. The field where Tommy Mitchell's sneaker was found became the grim epicenter of the investigation. Police tape now stretched for dozens of yards, encompassing the area where the small blue shoe had lain hidden. Officers moved in a grid pattern, their eyes scanning the ground for any other dropped items, any footprints that didn't belong, any sign of a struggle or a vehicle having stopped abruptly. The oppressive heat of the July afternoon seemed to press down, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. Detective Reynolds stood with the lead forensic technician examining the bagged sneaker. Up close, the details were starkly clear: the ripped eyelet, the frayed, broken lace. This wasn't a shoe that had simply slipped off during a walk. This was a shoe that had been pulled hard, perhaps as its wearer was running or being dragged. The scuff mark across the toe suggested resistance, a foot being planted firmly or dragged against the ground. "Definitely forcibly removed, Detective," the technician confirmed, his voice clinical. "Could be caught on something, of course, but given the tension required to break that lace and stretch the fabric, suggests significant force. And the location, nowhere near any maintained trail." Reynolds nodded, his jaw tight. This small, bright sneaker was a brutal counterpoint to the unnerving calm of the Mitchell house. The house said they vanished peacefully. The sneaker said something violent happened. Back at the makeshift command post set up in the Havenwood Town Hall, the map of the area had a new, crucial marker on County Road 17. The police whiteboard, previously filled with question marks and speculative timelines, began to fill with new possibilities, darker hypotheses. They reviewed the digital evidence again, now seen through the lens of the sneaker. Tommy's bus searches for the town an hour away. Had he been planning to meet someone there? Was the sneaker lost during an attempt to escape to that location or from someone who brought him there? Sarah's deleted messages with her friend. Were they talking about something risky? Something that put her or her family in danger? The theories, previously ranging from improbable voluntary departure to accidental mishap in a hidden part of town, coalesced around a more sinister core. "They were taken," Detective Reynolds stated, looking at his team. The words hung heavy in the air. Why that location? Miles from their home, isolated, bordered by thick woods. Not a place for a casual stop. It suggested either a planned meeting place or a place specifically chosen for its remoteness. The new working theory began to take shape. The Mitchells were somehow coerced or forcibly removed from their home sometime late on the night of July 3rd or the early morning of the 4th. They were transported, likely by vehicle, to the area near County Road 17. What happened there was still a mystery. A transfer to another vehicle? An attempt to escape? An altercation? Tommy's sneaker was the only physical witness. Had the family witnessed something they shouldn't have? Perhaps something related to the isolated location. Was John's business trouble tied to something illegal, leading to a confrontation? Had Sarah or Tommy gotten involved in something dangerous that spilled over to their family? The digital breadcrumbs and the physical evidence, though fragmented, pointed away from internal family issues and towards an external threat. The shift in the investigation was palpable. The case was no longer just a perplexing missing persons file. It was now likely an abduction. The psychological impact on Havenwood was profound. If the Mitchells were taken, that meant whoever took them could still be out there, perhaps even still in town. The fear that had been simmering now threatened to boil over into outright panic. Detective Reynolds felt the weight of it. The initial ambiguity of the case had been frustrating. This new direction, however, was terrifying. It was more concrete, yes, but it meant the Mitchells were likely in grave danger, and the clock was ticking faster than ever. The muddy, torn sneaker wasn't just a piece of evidence, it was a cry for help from a silent missing boy, leading them down a path far darker than anyone in Havenwood had imagined just days ago. The mystery was deepening, transforming from a riddle into a hunt. The pleasant facade of the Havenwood police station, normally a quiet place handling fender benders and noise complaints, had been transformed. The air felt charged, thick with unspoken questions and the low hum of official activity. Detective Reynolds had moved beyond casual chats over coffee. He was now conducting formal interviews in a small, windowless room, the kind designed to encourage honesty or reveal the strain of withholding it. The discovery of Tommy's sneaker had changed everything. It had given the case a new, terrifying gravity and focused the investigation's lens more sharply on the people who might have had a reason to harm the Mitchells, or who might have seen something they were afraid to report. The casual suspicion that had blanketed Havenwood was now being directed, pinpointed at individuals whose initial stories had seemed less than complete. Arthur Henderson had already given his statement, clear and consistent. But others were being brought in. Mr. Davison, a local contractor who had been having a long-standing financial dispute with John Mitchell over a late payment. Mrs. Gable, who, despite her initial concern, had a reputation for knowing everyone's business and perhaps holding on to a few secrets of her own. And even Mark, one of Tommy's friends, whose nervous energy during the initial interview had registered with Reynolds. Mr. Davison sat across from Reynolds, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a burly man, but here, stripped of his worksite authority, he seemed diminished. "Look, Detective, John and I had our disagreements about the money," Davison admitted, his voice rough. "But it was business. You don't disappear a man and his family over a few $1,000s. Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "Where were you the night of July 3rd, Mr. Davison, and the morning of the 4th? Davison's alibi was shaky. He claimed to have been home alone, watching TV, going to bed early. No one to confirm it. His story was plausible but unverified. He sweated under the cool lights, his eyes darting around the room. He seemed more agitated than a man with nothing to hide should be. Had the pressure of the financial dispute been greater than he let on? Or was his nervousness simply the reaction of an ordinary person under intense scrutiny? Later, Mrs. Gable arrived, dressed impeccably, her expression a careful mask of dignified concern. She spoke smoothly, reiterating her shock and worry for Emily. But when Reynolds asked her about Emily's personal life, about any stress or worries she might have confided, Mrs. Gable became more guarded. "Emily and I were friends, of course," she said a little too quickly, "but we didn't delve into deep personal matters. We kept things light." Yet her eyes held a flicker of something. Knowledge. Judgment. Reynolds remembered Agnes, the town clerk, hinting at Emily having burdens. Was Mrs. Gable aware of those burdens, and choosing not to share? Was she protecting Emily's reputation or her own? The interview with Mark, Tommy's friend, was a study in teenage anxiety amplified by guilt. He fidgeted constantly, avoiding eye contact. "Mark," Reynolds said softly, "we know teenagers have their own lives, their own secrets. We're not trying to get anyone in trouble for sneaking out or anything like that. We just need to know if anything Tommy was involved in, anything he was planning, could have put him or his family in danger." Mark swallowed hard. He finally admitted that Tommy had been unusually secretive in the days before the 4th, talking to someone online he wouldn't name, seeming anxious. And those bus searches? Mark didn't know about them, but he admitted Tommy had mentioned wanting to get out of Havenwood just for a little while, not running away permanently, but just a break, a clandestine meeting, a small act of teenage rebellion that somehow intersected with something far more serious. As each interview concluded, Reynolds was left with more pieces, but the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. Financial pressure, guarded secrets, shaky alibis, a teenager's hidden anxieties. Each person had their own reasons for not being completely transparent, protecting their reputation, avoiding minor embarrassment, perhaps even genuine fear. But were any of these tangled threads connected to the Mitchells' disappearance? Sitting alone in the quiet office after a long day of probing questions and nervous answers, Reynolds felt the oppressive weight of the town's hidden life. Havenwood wasn't as simple or as innocent as it seemed on the surface. Beneath the veneer of neighborly charm were layers of human frailty, conflict, and secrets. He looked at the notes from the interviews, at the inconsistencies and the unspoken words. Somewhere in the complicated web of this small town's life lay the answer to what happened to the Mitchell family. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that uncovering the truth would mean shining a light into the darkest, most private corners of Havenwood. The interrogations were just beginning to scratch the surface. While Detective Reynolds and his team were peeling back the layers of the Mitchells' digital lives and grilling reluctant witnesses, the rest of Havenwood was grappling with the void left behind and with the uncomfortable introspection the disappearance had triggered. For some, like Gary Peterson, who ran the small, struggling auto repair shop on the edge of town, the Mitchells' vanishing act felt less like a mystery and more like a grim, amplified reflection of his own life teetering on the brink. Gary's shop, Peterson's Auto, had been a Havenwood fixture for 50 years, started by his father. Now the paint was peeling, the lift groaned with age, and the bills seemed to pile up faster than he could fix transmissions. The new chain repair shop that had opened down the highway a few years back, clean and corporate, was slowly siphoning off his customers. John Mitchell, with his seemingly successful hardware store weathering the same storm, had been a quiet source of Gary's simmering resentment and grudging admiration. They were small-town businessmen, supposedly in the same boat, but John had always seemed to row just a little bit stronger. Gary had debts. Not crippling, not yet, but enough to keep him awake at night, staring at the water stains on his bedroom ceiling. He owed his main supplier a significant amount, had maxed out his business credit card, and the bank was starting to send notices about the missed payments on the shop's mortgage. He worked long hours, his hands perpetually stained with grease, but it felt like shoveling sand against the tide. When the news of the Mitchells' disappearance broke, Gary had felt the same initial shock as everyone else. But underneath it was a cold, self-serving thought. At least it's not me. At least my problems aren't on the front page. He knew it was a terrible thing to think, and the guilt gnawed at him. Then the investigation ramped up. The police were asking questions everywhere, about who was struggling, who owed money, who might be desperate. Gary felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't seen the Mitchells on the night of the 3rd or the 4th, hadn't been anywhere near their house. His alibi was solid, if unspectacular, alone at home, nursing a few beers, worrying about the bills. But then came the news about the sneaker found out on County Road 17. Gary knew that road, knew it well. He sometimes used the dirt track that ran off it as a shortcut when picking up parts from a supplier in the next town, avoiding the main highway. He'd driven that way late on the night of July 3rd around midnight. His old pickup truck, its muffler rattling, a few empty gas cans clanking in the back. He hadn't seen anything, not that he recalled. Just the dark woods, the empty field. Now, the thought sent a shiver down his spine despite the July heat. What if he had seen something and not realized it? What if his beat-up truck had been spotted on that road around the time the Mitchells were potentially being moved? What if his financial problems, his quiet desperation, suddenly made him look like a suspect? He'd seen Detective Reynolds' car parked near the donut stop yesterday. Had Reynolds looked at him? Had someone mentioned his debts? Gary found himself glancing over his shoulder more often, jumping at sudden noises. His sleep, already fitful, became haunted by vague anxieties and the imagined sound of a police siren outside his window. He knew logically that his struggles were probably unconnected to the Mitchells' fate. His debts were his own, a common story of a small business fighting to survive. But the disappearance, so inexplicable and terrifying, had ripped open the quiet underbelly of Havenwood, exposing the anxieties and secrets that everyone usually kept carefully hidden. Gary's secret wasn't a dark past or a violent streak. It was simply the fear of failure, the shame of potentially losing his father's legacy. But in the current climate of suspicion, even that felt dangerous. A vulnerability that might be misinterpreted. As Gary wiped down a greasy counter in his empty shop, the silence amplifying the ticking of the clock and the gnawing in his gut, he realized that the Mitchells' disappearance hadn't just taken a family, it had cast a harsh, unforgiving light on everyone else in town, revealing the parallel lines of worry, debt, and hidden fear that ran beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary lives. He was just one thread in that complicated, unraveling tapestry, hoping his own fragile reality wouldn't completely unravel under the strain. Weeks had ground by, each day without news stretching the patience and fraying the nerves of Havenwood and the investigators alike. The police command center in the town hall hummed with a weary, relentless energy. Whiteboards were covered in timelines, suspect lists, maps dotted with pins. Desks were buried under stacks of paper. Financial records subpoenaed from John Mitchell's business, credit card statements, phone records, transcripts of interviews, analysis from the digital forensics lab, reports from the search teams. It was a sea of information, and Detective Reynolds felt like he was drowning in it, searching for a single, solid piece of land. It was late on a stifling hot evening in early August 2024. Most of the team had gone home, leaving Reynolds and a junior detective, Officer Evans, hunched over a large printout of financial transactions related to John Mitchell's hardware store. They were cross-referencing expenditures, looking for anything unusual in the months leading up to July. "Nothing jumps out, Detective," Evans sighed, running a finger down a column of figures. "Standard suppliers, utility bills, payroll." John wasn't exactly living large, but it looks like the store was breaking even. Tight, but not like he was about to declare bankruptcy. Reynolds rubbed his tired eyes. He'd been over these records a dozen times. The financial angle, while initially promising given the rumors, hadn't yielded a clear motive for disappearing an entire family. "Go back to the 3 months before July," Reynolds instructed, pointing at the printout. "Look at any outgoing payments over, say, $5,000. Anything not to a regular supplier or service." Evans scrolled, clicking. "Okay, regular stuff. Here, June 10th, check for $8,500, payable to County Services, LLC. He frowned. "Doesn't ring a bell. Is that a supplier?" Reynolds leaned closer. County Services, LLC. The name was vague, generic. He hadn't seen it before in the supplier lists. Check the business registration for County Services, LLC in the state database. See who it's registered to. While Evans worked on the computer, Reynolds pulled up John Mitchell's personal bank statements again. He remembered seeing a few larger-than-usual cash withdrawals in May and June, but nothing seemed directly connected to the business. Now, he looked closer at the dates of those withdrawals. Evans whistled softly. "Detective, County Services, LLC is registered to a shell corporation. Address is just a P.O. box in the next county over, but the registered agent, it's listed as Michael S. Davison. Michael S. Davison, the contractor with the shaky alibi and the financial dispute with John Mitchell. The man who sweated under the interrogation lights." Reynolds felt a jolt go through him, chasing away the fatigue. He looked back at John's personal bank statements. The dates of the cash withdrawals in May and June, they closely preceded 2 separate large deposits made into John Mitchell's personal account from an unlisted source. And the date of the $8,500 check from the business account to County Services, LLC, registered to Davison, it was just 3 days after the second large cash deposit appeared in John's personal account. A picture, faint but chilling, began to form. This wasn't just a dispute over a late payment. John Mitchell's business wasn't just breaking even, it might have been receiving infusions of cash. Cash that appeared to be coming from somewhere outside the normal course of business, deposited into his personal account, and then, at least once, part of it funneled back out through a shell company linked to a man he was supposedly arguing with financially. Why would John Mitchell be getting large, unexplained cash deposits and then paying money to his supposed debtor through a shell company? It smelled like laundering, or perhaps payment for a service rendered. What kind of service? And was it connected to whatever Tommy Mitchell had been searching for, or what Sarah had deleted from her messages? Reynolds stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the floor in the quiet room. The pieces weren't scattered anymore. They were snapping together, forming a shape he hadn't seen before, a shape involving hidden transactions. a shell company, and a man with a weak alibi who had a contentious relationship with John Mitchell. The Mitchells' disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't a simple family crisis. It was tied to something specific, something illicit, and it was happening right here, or connected to someone right here in Havenwood. "Evans," Reynolds said, his voice sharp with renewed focus. "Pull up everything we have on Michael Davison, every interaction with the Mitchells, every detail from his interview, his financials, everything. And get his alibi from July 3rd and 4th re-verified." Quietly. The case had just found its focal point. The long, frustrating search through the town's surface had finally uncovered a hidden current, a dark line running from John Mitchell's business account to a shell company and a man with a secret. The breakthrough was here, and with it came the chilling certainty that the truth about the Mitchell family was not just tragic, but potentially dangerous. The hunt was on. The yellow tape came down eventually, a silent surrender to the passage of time and the grim finality of what had been uncovered. The Mitchell house stood on Sycamore Lane, no longer a place of urgent investigation, but a silent monument. Weeks turned into months after the truth about that 4th of July was laid bare. A truth tangled in John Mitchell's desperate secret dealings. A truth that had reached out from the shadows and consumed a family whole. Havenwood breathed again, a shallow, hesitant breath. The intense, suffocating fear that someone among them was a monster had lifted with the arrest of Michael Davison and his accomplices, the details of their grim actions pieced together from fragmented digital trails, reluctant confessions, and, tragically, the scene finally discovered out on County Road 17. The specific cores were now known, whispered about behind closed doors, reported in hushed tones by the local news. But knowing didn't make the unease disappear. The town was changed. Permanently. The easy trust that had been Havenwood's bedrock was fractured. Neighbors who had suspected neighbors now averted their gaze, shame warring with lingering suspicion. The secrets unearthed during the investigation. Not just John Mitchell's dangerous entanglement, but the smaller, everyday deceptions and struggles of others had peeled back a comfortable illusion. Havenwood saw itself now, not as an idyllic haven, but as a place like any other, capable of harboring darkness beneath its sun-drenched surface. Emily Mitchell's parents came and collected Buddy, the golden retriever, who seemed to carry his own silent grief, his tail no longer thumping with his former cheerful abandon. They held a memorial service at the town church, a somber affair where empty seats ached with the weight of loss and the collective tears of the community flowed, a mix of sorrow for the Mitchells and a release of the tension that had gripped them all. Sarah and Tommy's friends tried to go back to their teenage lives, but a certain innocence had been stolen, replaced by a premature understanding of the world's capacity for cruelty. The swing set in the Mitchells' backyard stood empty, a silent, rusting reminder of laughter that would never be heard again. Legal proceedings followed, a sterile, drawn-out process that felt detached from the raw grief still lingering in the air. Davison and the others faced justice, but their convictions, while necessary, offered little solace to a town grappling with a wound that felt too deep to fully heal. Detective Reynolds oversaw the conclusion of the case in Havenwood. He saw the town's struggle, the way people tried to rebuild bridges of trust that had been burned. He saw the quiet acts of kindness, too. Meals delivered to the Mitchell grandparents, help offered to Gary Peterson with his struggling shop, a different kind of debt exposed, met with unexpected community support rather than condemnation. Havenwood wasn't defined solely by the darkness that had visited it, but also by the fragile resilience of its people. He packed his bags in the small, impersonal motel room he'd occupied for weeks. The case was closed, the reports filed. His time in Havenwood was over. He drove out of town the way he had come in, past the sign that read, "Welcome to Havenwood, a great place to live." It felt different now. He knew the secrets that lay beneath the manicured lawns and friendly smiles. He knew the fear that could lurk in the silence of a seemingly ordinary house. Turning onto the highway, leaving the small town behind, Detective Reynolds carried with him the weight of the Mitchell case, another file in a career filled with human tragedy. But he also carried the image of Havenwood, a town that had been forced to confront its own hidden complexities, a community scarred but perhaps, in time, stronger for having survived the storm that had raged beneath its quiet surface. The mystery was solved, the culprits caught, but the ghosts of the Mitchell family would continue to haunt the streets of Havenwood, a somber, lasting testament to the secrets that even the most ordinary places can hold. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to the channel and give this story a like.